So today's presenters are Danny Soto, Brandon Miller, and Ana Ramirez Zarate.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danny Soto. I am the interim director of the Research and Action Center at Impact Justice. Um, and so, yeah, we're headquartered here in Oakland, California. So I work in Alameda County, but I live in Contra Costa County.
My name is Brandon Miller. I'm a senior researcher with Impact Justice. My background is in reentry and community reintegration.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ana Ramirez. I'm a research analyst with Impact Justice, and my background is in community organizing and participatory research at the community level.
We'll go over the credible messenger model and its effectiveness. We'll also go over how to best utilize credible messengers / peer supports. We will also go over how to best support credible messengers. And then finally, we'll give practical examples of the credible messenger model. The words credible and credibility are terms that we hear a lot today, right? But what do those words really mean to people who have been justice involved, right? Words like respect, trustworthiness, reliability, and consistencies are all characteristics that one might think of when we think of the word credibility, right? However, despite some of our best intentions, credibility isn't given. It must be earned through intent, through actions, and through personal commitment, both from individuals and from systems, right? And so the credible messenger movement is based on a core belief that communities possess transformative resources to lift up justice-involved peoples in comprehensive and positive ways. The credible messenger movement believes that those closest to the issues possess the solutions to help break cycles of violence, justice involvement, as well as marginalizations of their communities. And so research has shown us that the credible messenger model is capable of achieving these goals. So the first slide, what is a credible messenger? Oh, sorry, can go back real quick, sorry. So the first slide just goes over what a credible messenger is, right? And so a credible messenger is a mentor who has passed through the justice system and sustainably transformed their lives. People who are able to break through the younger justice-involved people and form powerful, transformative personal relationships. This role may be formal or informal, but credibility must be determined by the community and those who credible messengers serve. Traditional strategies for improving neighborhood safety, as we all know, have been heavily invested in incarceration and outcomes and resourcing outside counselors and experts, right? But we all know that path has been extremely expensive, and it creates frustration within the community, not only for systems such as government systems, but as well as for law enforcement, right? And often those pathways that we relied on in the past have failed to provide positive pathways for justice-involved folks. The credible messenger model is based on a holistic, comprehensive approach to justice that transforms and improves individual lives. It seeks to rearrange the relationship between communities and the justice system, and it seeks to empower neighborhoods to use the resources they have within to maintain public safety. And so the first component of this model is connection to community, which is one of the most important, right? Credible messengers must come from the communities that they come from, right? The credibility of that individual must be given from the people in the community. And this also oftentimes happens through a shared experience, right? Through having gone through similar experiences, having gone through or dealt with going up against systems obstacles within those same communities. Credible messengers are able to leverage their shared experience with those in the community that they serve. The third component of the credible messenger model is by modeling positive behaviors in relationships in their own lives for individuals that they work with, right? Develop deep, long-term relationships that can create and sustain processes of healing, growth, and development. This isn't short-term investment, right? This requires sustained support over long periods of time, right? The next component of credible messenger model is advocacy, which can be both for individuals and communities, right? This really entails uplifting the voices and concerns of those who credible messengers work with to system partners and other agencies. One of the last components of the credible messenger model is professionalism. And this comes in the form of really establishing boundaries for all parties, both youth, community, and system partners, right? And those boundaries can be in the form of what a credible messenger is and isn't capable of doing or achieving. The power of credible messengers is in the shared experience, which is rooted in the communities and individuals who can benefit from their experiences. So in practice, for the communities that credible messengers worked in, this might look like enhanced community capacity that can be leveraged to solve collective problems and improve or maintain the well-being of communities. This may also look like restorative justice practices, which aim to repair harm, encourage accountability, and support those impacted by violence. And then it may also look like being advocates to drive deep structural changes in the community, right? And then for the credible messenger themselves, this can look like professional development through new skills that they learn, that they learn and gain through their time as a credible messenger. It may also increase their employability opportunities, as well as increase personal growth as they help and give back to the communities that they come from. For impacted persons and families, this may look like this can look like effectively meeting the needs of the people that credible messengers work with, improved outcomes and prepared success by providing resources and opportunities for those that they work with, and also by building networks, positive relationships for other people in the community. And then finally, for the justice system itself, credible messengers are capable of helping to change the culture, policy, and practices within those systems. And then also potentially helping relationships between communities and systems. And so the data and our own experiences in our own respected fields shows us that there's a glaring overlap between the justice system and other systems of care. 43% of individuals in state prisons have a diagnosed mental health disorder, and 44% of individuals in county jails have a diagnosed mental health disorder. People who have been justice involved need core support from other systems of care, such as behavioral health and social services, both before and especially after incarceration, because of the traumatic nature of our criminal legal system, right? The principles of credible messenger apply in any system of care because the shared goals of creating pathways to recovery, healing, and development, and the development of new positive life skills. Credible messengers have experienced and modeled these pathways every day. And so, as I said before, the overlap is profound in systems of care, and this translates into credible messengers being connectors, brokers, legitimizers, and co-navigators with people who may have an aversion to getting support from systems of care because of stigma that may be attached to it or a cultural disconnect, right? And so we see credible messengers, community health workers, peer advocators, and public health social workers breaking down these walls, making these connections, and bridging divides through their own wellness journey every day in the work that you all do.
I will be covering, as Brendan has been sharing, sort of like the components and what a credible messenger model entails. I'll be covering how to best utilize credible messengers and peer support specialists in the field. And so here are just a couple pointers to begin with. Um, it is important to utilize credible messengers in neighborhoods that have been impacted, particularly by structural marginalization, as well as criminalization. And the reason is because communities who are over criminalized or are often at the margins, not receiving the proper services, often have lack of trust when it comes to engaging with either like the police or engaging in gathering and getting social services. So whenever there is a lack of trust between the community and government entities, oftentimes credible messengers and having them in the community could be a way to get resources and actually someone that the community trusts to be able to share, sort of like what's happening in their communities, if they have any doubts about any government programs that may be taking place or they may be hesitant to access. So utilizing them in that way could essentially mean that people could be getting access to safety net programs that otherwise they wouldn't be accessing because they don't have that trust. Also utilizing credible messengers who may already be working informally is really important. It's particularly important to identify who they are in the community and make sure that they are supported equitably. And oftentimes, right, like when we think about community work, and particularly me as a community organizer, oftentimes there's already people in the community who may be doing the work, who may be supporting another family, who may be navigating the criminal legal system. So knowing who those folks are that are providing the pivotal support to other community members is really important to ensure that we're fostering their leadership and also sort of carrying the work that they're doing. Additionally, it's also very important to think about how credible messengers are very effective, particularly with juvenile justice, as well as adults that may be involved in the criminal legal system. And the way that they play a powerful role there is by providing empowerment to other community members, whether they're young people or adults that may be systems involved. And particularly the empowerment and the way that they're able to connect with other folks is because of that similar background and lived experience that they have. So young people, as well as other adults that may be systems involved, are able to relate because to them, right, like credible messengers are clear examples of strength, of lived experience, and how they're able to see essentially through credible messengers that someone's lived experience is an asset rather than something that is stigmatizing them. So thinking of them in that way could really lead to effective ways to reduce essentially the contact that young people or other older adults may have in the criminal legal system. Um, Let me see. The other thing that I do want to highlight in terms of how to best utilize credible messengers is that they could be specifically utilized to engage specialized populations. And what we mean by that is folks who have lived experience, for instance, around substance abuse in other communities. If you have someone who has that type of background, they will be able to relate and think of strategies to engage that community member who may be hesitant to otherwise get assistance or help from traditional ways of getting assistance. And so with that being said, I do want to ask Catherine maybe to go to the next slide. Additional ways to think about how to best utilize credible messengers and why they're so effective in what they do is because oftentimes credible messengers utilize a holistic approach that really encompasses what we have been talking about, providing mentorship to young people, providing mentorship to older adults, and really wraparound support that really is meant to meet the needs of folks in a way that is supportive of them. Um, And here are just a couple examples that we can think of when it comes to thinking about holistic approach. There may be credible messengers that in their role provide court accompaniment to community members who may be navigating the legal system and who may be able to provide that lived experience and example so that others could think about how to best, move forward on their cases, for instance. So taking a holistic approach is really a way of addressing the different needs that people may have. Um, the other example in which credible messengers are really effective, and we'll dive into more examples here specifically in the Bay Area, but credible messengers are awesome or amazing. They have amazing strategies in terms of addressing conflict and specifically violence prevention, doing violence prevention in the community. They have strategies rather like through their lived experience and also as well as training to be able to de-escalate conflicts in the community, to be able to do mediations because of the trust and the relationships that they have in the community. I think that it's important, and I will get into this a little bit later as well, is that because of the lived experience that people have and also the fact that they lived in their communities that they're serving, they're able to establish those ways of communication that otherwise, like for instance, police or perhaps like social workers or other people in the field may not be able to do so. They're also credible messengers are effective at promoting and disseminating healing practices. And so in terms of thinking about the way that they share these healing strategies or coping strategies, instilling hope within the community, it's connecting it back to their story, right? Like how they personally have been able to sort of heal through the work that they do, and it's also more resonant with the folks that are receiving this communication from credible messengers, right? Like receiving the information from someone who has walked in a similar pathway that they have. Additionally, right, credible messengers are also very effective in fostering community empowerment. Once again, because this goes back to the lived experience that they have, they're able to share the knowledge about systemic and structural oppression. They're able to share it back to their own personal experience in a way that the community is able to see themselves as an example of like, if this person has been able to do it, so can I, right? So in terms of thinking about empowering the community to think of themselves as agents of change, credible messengers are really effective in being able to translate the message in a way that the community is able to connect with. Brandon touched a little bit about this, like advocacy. Credible messengers are particularly play a pivotal role in providing advocacy support to community members. I give this example a little bit earlier, right? But my background is, like I said, in community organizing, and I have supported in the past community members navigate through the legal system. So I, as someone who has lived experience, being systems impacted and supporting a person that's been system impacted as well. Thinking about the way that we advocate in the court process, right? Like when we're going with someone to court, helping them navigate the system, helping them ask key questions of, for instance, their public defender, or ask key questions so that they understand the legal process is really important. So credible messengers play a key role in breaking down information and making sure that the community member who may be going through the criminal legal system feels supported. And most importantly, they also play a key role in building relationships, not only with the community that they're serving, but also with systems as well as policymakers, so that ultimately they're able to bring change back to the community. So these are just a few examples of how to successfully be able to utilize credible messengers and how they're effective in what they do. But as I kind of shared at the beginning, we will be sharing a couple of examples here in the Bay Area where there is a couple of organizations as well as programs particularly that encompass credible messengers and how they've been able to be successful. And so So one of the programs that I want to particularly highlight is an organization called Youth Alive here in Oakland. They have two programs. One of them is called Pathways. This is a mentorship program that is meant to help young people make that transition after they have been incarcerated, to be able to transition back into their homes, back into the school that they were prior going to incarceration, and back to stability. The way that this program utilizes a credible messenger model is actually by hiring the people, the staff that are behind Pathways have all been systems impacted. And oftentimes, they have been recipients of the program itself. There is one example that I can share of a staff member there who, he was a recipient of the Pathways program as a young person, then eventually was able to, as he said it himself, turn his life around. He went on to get a master's degree and eventually came back and is now, fully supporting the program as a lead, right? He believes that his lived experience is able to help him and rather be an asset to be able to contribute back to his community. On the other hand, another credible messenger sort of model and program is the violence interruption program at Youth Alive. This is a street-focused program in Oakland that focuses on diffusing tension, mediating conflicts in the community to essentially encourage community members to use alternative modes of addressing like conflict and violence that do not result in actually using like a firearm or like using any other modes of violence, that would lead to further, victimization. And so the violence interruption program relies on utilizing folks that grew up in Oakland who have lived experience, whether it's, them going through the system, the criminal legal system, to come back into the community, into the neighborhoods that they grew up in, to diffuse tensions and diffuse any conflicts that may arise so that there's no further violence that's carried forward, right? And it is the relationship that they have with people, the trust that they've been able to build with community members that allows them to do that work, right? Like, as I said at the very beginning, oftentimes like people who live in neighborhoods where there's a lot of violence will oftentimes not go to the police because that will only mean, right, like further violence taking place within their community. So who to better rely than to people who you grew up with to be able to understand the circumstances and what it is that you're going through. So both of these programs have been really successful because they particularly utilize people that have lived experience, and the people that are being served are able to relate to that experience. And so my colleagues will cover a little bit more as to how to support credible messengers, because this work is very heavy, right? So we need to talk about as well, what are the supports that need to be provided to credible messengers so that they are sustained and are able to keep the work moving forward. And so I do want to pass it over to Danny to be able to talk a little bit more about how do we support credible messengers, what is needed for them. And just let me go ahead and pass it over. That way they can get into it.
As Anna kind of previewed, how do we support credible messengers, peer support specialists, when we are lucky enough to be able to work with them? As Anna mentioned, these are not typical 9-to-5 jobs, right? They entail a lot of emotional and psychological labor. They also often entail being essentially on call for people who are really relying on the credible messengers for support, for stability, for resources and things like that. It's also important to remember that credible messengers are oftentimes still healing from their own experiences of victimization with violence, their own experiences of having been incarcerated or otherwise system involved, and are fighting the stigma that comes along with having been justice involved, right? Both formal in the sense of having records, conviction histories and things like that, and also informal in the sense that, justice system involvement, often is just stigmatized. And so credible messengers, the value is that they come from the communities that they're serving, right? But then that also means that they're facing the same challenges that they're trying to help alleviate in their own communities, right? So things like structural racism and segregation and poverty, these kind of structural inequalities that are generational sometimes in communities, they're also being impacted at the same time often. Another challenge here is that when you look at these positions, right, you look at how much they are paid, they're often very low paid positions. And this adds additional challenges and life stresses, as it would to anyone, who's not making a living or a thriving wage. But in combination with the kind of intensity of this role, this can make these roles and positions very, very challenging. And so some of the ways that we know that we can support credible messengers, and a lot of this has come out of, some of this has come from our own research, and some of this is taken from, other folks' research that exists in the field. One is, make sure that we're paying credible messengers, folks with lived experience, a living wage, including healthcare benefits. This is something that's really, really important for everyone, but for credible messengers in particular. Along with this is, of course, we don't want to tokenize folks with lived experience or exploit their stories, right? We've heard from a lot of folks in credible messenger and peer educator roles that they kind of almost like they're trotted out to share their stories whenever the organization kind of demands, right? That's not an appropriate way to use folks. Stories belong to the people that hold those experiences, and they should have complete control and say over when and where and how and what parts of their stories are shared, right? There should also be a holistic look at the organization about around the equitable allocation of resources and supports. And I'm using the term equitable here very deliberately. Equality, right? Equality and equity are not the same. Equality means that everyone gets the same thing, right? Everyone gets the same amount of vacation time, wellness time, all of those kind of benefits and that kind of thing. Equity means that people get what they need. Everybody getting what they need means acknowledging that some roles and positions are more psychologically difficult as well. They require more labor on top of just the 9 to 5 or the 40 hours a week that they're getting paid for, right? And so one thing that we advocate for is that these roles, should be given adequate time off and encouragement to step away, right? Kind of pushing back against those sometimes toxic work expectations that we have to work until we're exhausted and not take vacation. And, self-care in the workplace has become more and more central to our conversations. And it is especially important for folks who are doing on the ground work, literally interrupting and trying to mediate violence and things like that in the community, right? And so, we would recommend that these roles should be given adequate time off, enough to take a substantial vacation at least, or break from work at least twice a year, with smaller breaks in between. Organizations may not be able to do this organization-wide, but definitely should prioritize positions like this for those kinds of, kind of time off policies. Also, work environments and policies that support well-being, right? Emotional support for vicarious and secondary trauma, right? So we know that being exposed to other people's trauma can be traumatic and can also re-trigger our own experiences of trauma, right? And so knowing that that is going to happen, most likely, make sure that those supports are in place. Again, adequate time off and encouragement to step away. And something else that was a little bit not entirely unexpected, but I guess surprising that it rose to the top in this way, is advocating, with our funders for flexibility in funding and program eligibility criteria. A lot of credible messengers that we've spoken with expressed a lot of frustration when they're not able to help certain people because they're outside of eligibility criteria, or they're not able to help people in certain ways because only certain activities are kind of supported by the funding stream. And so when and where we are able to push back with funders or lend our voices when it's time for public comment on certain things, we should be advocating for this flexibility, because the inability to help as many people as we can and in all of the ways that they need, being unable to do that can hinder efficacy and can lead to frustration, a sense of moral injury, and burnout. Another way that we can better support credible messengers, peer support specialists, and those kinds of positions is to make sure that there are professional development and career advancement opportunities outside of the credible messenger role. A lot of people felt like this was their life's work, their life's calling. And others expressed that, this is something that they want to do for a period of time and then pass the torch to the next generation of folks. And so making sure that we are supporting them in their long-term career goals can be really, really valuable. And so there are obviously hard skills, things that are easy to translate onto a resume, things like providing trainings in motivational interviewing, trauma-informed care, crisis intervention, things like that. Not only help them perform to the best of their ability in their current roles, but those are transferable skills, right? They're applicable and useful across a range of positions. There's also a lot of soft skills, right? Credible messengers and peer support specialists have a wealth of lived experience and expertise, right? But they may not have had as many of these informal opportunities that someone whose kind of life path was not interrupted by the justice system might have had, right? So learning about how to manage your own trauma as well as other people's trauma. Population-specific skills. So, if people are working with young people or interested in working with young people, learning about positive youth development, right? If you're interested in working with the LGBTQ+ community, learning about that community and the issues that they face, right? And so on. Workplace and business skills, things like managing time, how to supervise someone, how to give and receive feedback, what are the expectations for writing emails and the tone and how you address people, things like that. Grant writing is a really, really invaluable skill as well, and also obviously transferable. So looking for opportunities to provide trainings, talking to staff to see what areas they're particularly interested in. All of that can help people feel supported and also give them the both hard and soft skills that they need to excel in their current role and also open up opportunities for future professional growth and development. This last point here is also really important. This is as credible messengers and this kind of model becomes more popular is not exactly the right word, but for lack of a better word, as it becomes more popular, there will be an urge to credentialize. We've seen this in other sectors and things like that. But we would urge resisting credentialization because this can impose another barrier to opportunity for folks who already have limited access to resources and opportunities, right? Interviews that we've done with credible messengers also reveal that there's a concern that credentialization, so like I have a certificate showing that I am a credible messenger or something like that, could lead folks to view credible messengers as clinicians in some way, or that the credible messengers model becomes somewhat clinical in nature, which is very, very different from its roots in transformative justice and transforming those relationships between communities and systems. So we would resist the urge to credentialize. It does, you know, not having a credential does mean that there's more kind of work involved in locating folks who will genuinely be seen as credible by the communities that they're serving. Brandon talked a lot about the importance of that, but it is, we think, pretty vital.
Thank you everyone so much for attending our session. For additional resources, visit the CARE website.